I can't. Can you hear me?
Hello. Hi. It's Jude
Hi.
Belanger, Wilton Drive Voice. How are you, Dr. Sean Udell?
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Ah, very good. Excellent. I'm so happy that we get to talk today. I was thrilled to come across your thesis, Gayification, and I'm just recording this just for reference. We may use
Yeah.
it main anyway, just to have. But I was so happy to come across your thesis that you had wrote for
hmm
it's right now at the Wilton Manors Historical Society. And it's been there for a little while now. Because you did
Yeah.
this when did you did this a little back when, huh?
I- Yeah, the thesis was written in April of 2011, or it was submitted then. But I started the work on it in the summer of 2010.
Why did you choose to do it?
So I'm originally from Fort Lauderdale, born and raised, and as a even before I had come out, I was aware of Wilton Manors and kind of enchanted by the place. It just was when I was in my adolescence, it was really the hub of gay life in South Florida, and hard to miss that as a in my baby gay years. And so and when I left Florida, part of why I left was because the community that I'm from was quite conservative, and I didn't feel very affirmed in my identity. And I moved to New York City, and which was completely different. But when I was in New York and learning about a lot about sort of gay enclave formation in various parts of the country, I started to think a lot about Wilton Manors and how there's a story there that just hadn't been told.
Mm.
Um, and so I was excited about possibly doing it, and I was really lucky to have a thesis advisor who in many ways was even more excited than I was about the whole idea. She had never heard of Wilton Manors, and she's an expert in chain migration, specifically among like Mexican American communities and East Asian American communities coming to the United States. So she was very interested in this idea too, from a migration perspective. So she really kind of cheerleaded me on to do it because it was kind of daunting initially because you may know from this work that you're doing that history is not well preserved in Florida. And so it was actually quite hard to get good information and to actually kind of pull the story together, just because there are such limited kind of archival resources and things like that.
When I searched the Historical Society, your thesis is the only thing that came up. It's the
Yeah.
only thing they have for any gay culture whatsoever. It was like shocking. I was like shocked. I was like, this has been here for 40 plus years and this is all we have. It was really quite shocking to me. But the word gayification of Wilton Manors, that was like the perfect title. Did you make up gayification? Like, where did that come from?
So
Because it's like
yeah, gaytrification
gentrification.
is a
That's it.
word that I did coin. That is my
Oh,
fun fact. It later got put in Urban Dictionary after I published the thesis. So
right.
I tried to make it a thing. Dan Savage is definitely more of the person who coins words, but that is my word. Um, and yeah, and the idea is because there, as I was in the initial stages of putting this thesis together, there is this kind of there's this pervasive belief that gays can fuel gentrification, that gays will move to a neighborhood, make it look nice, and then straight people will see, my thesis advisor always say, they'll see the painted red door and they'll know, oh, this is a neighborhood that's up and coming, and they'll move there. And to some extent, that I didn't necessarily prove that to be wrong in the thesis. Like, I mean, in many ways, that is a story that I think is legitimate. But it's a bit of a stereotype. But that, yeah. So that was kind of
But
that's
it
the
did
origin
happen in
story of the
Wilton
word.
Manors. I mean, it was predominantly like a black neighborhood, almost a ghetto, when it began to be gentrified by the gays, right?
No, so that actually is a big misconception
Is it okay? That's why
of the
I wanted to
story.
clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
no, and I don't know where that story comes from, but it's a really a story that won't die. It was Wilton Manors. Wilton Manors was 99% white until the 1980 census. And Wilton Manors did not start diversifying at all until 1980. But even between 1980 and 1990, the amount of people of color that moved into the neighborhood was on the single digits. I mean, I'm not even sure it was
you.
5%. I actually, it's in my thesis, that particular narrative, because um, that is, I think, a potentially pernicious narrative that does come up with gay field gentrification, where like gays push out
Mhm.
poor people of color. And that was not what happened that's not what happened in Wilton Manors. In fact, what I argued is that gays moving in actually brought diversity, racial diversity to Wilton
Mm.
Manors, because Wilton Manors was actually like a white was just quite a white place, like ever since it was founded. I mean, not including obviously the Seminole tribe that likely lived there before 1920, but
Yeah.
but the ideal was it was when it was first founded was it was going to be this idyllic white suburb, and it really stayed that way from 1950 to 1980. Um, and what set the stage for gentrification in Wilton Manors was not like a racial vulnerability story, but instead it was a story of baby boomer, the sort of the baby boomers' parents moving in the 1950s, and aging out by the 1980s. Many of them were dying. The population of Wilton Manors was declining. The housing stock was not being kept up well because it was mostly an aging population, that led to the availability of a cheaper housing stock that was bought up by young gay men.
And it seemed also at the time that it was the innovative and creative realtors, driving the market as well. Starting with, maybe Victoria Park and then migrating over to Wilton Manors. But it just seemed to be a handful of realtors that kind of brought it to the
Mm-hmm.
table to begin with. And then the second thing that began to happen is, I believe, it was Alibi, or was it the other side? I believe it was George Kissinger, like, who ended prohibition, like the 1,000 foot distance
Mm-hmm.
between two bars. When that ended, like that kind of started the legacy, which has been here now for 40 years, because it just seems like the bars go up and down over the decades. They ebb and flow a little bit, but it seems like that began really the drive as far as it being LGBT plus culture. It is an arts and entertainment district, but more so it really is an LGBTQ plus district, really, even though it's not legally that. And so that ending of prohibition is really very interesting. And if you were able to talk to George Kissinger or Beverly McMahon from the other side, like, what would you have questions for them about, what that time that maybe you didn't get to answer, or something that maybe you'd want to confirm?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just a few clarifying points. So that was the the thesis of my thesis was that Wilton Manors became a majority gay city because of business interests. Unlike gay enclave formation in the Castro or in Greenwich Village, this was not the story of artists being like
Mhm.
living in this diverse community and having an open sort of mind and free expression, and people moving to this place because it was this kind of like open, lovely commune. Instead, the the reason that Wilton Manors became Wilton Manors was because it was a good business. It was good business for realtors, and it was good business for bar owners. And so my argument was that the realtors really started it in the mid to late 80s into the early 90s with getting initial sort of pioneering gay households into Wilton Manors. And by then, there were already some gay bars in Wilton Manors. There were not many, but there were a few. Other Side was one of them. I think the Glades was one of them. But my point, is that gay bars in South Florida were really spread out all across Broward County. And so what happened in around 1995 was that George Kissinger and then this development company called Redevco really petitioned the city of Wilton Manors to make this arts and entertainment district and to, as you sort of said, sort of liberalize the situation on alcohol and allow multiple venues that served alcohol to sort of coexist in the same area. And so, Wilton Manors, which this was also a big thing, throughout the United States in the mid 90s, was this idea of kind of regenerating communities by creating these kind of sort of kitschy niche sort of experiences wherever it was. And so the city of Wilton Manors already saw, that there were gay communities moving to their city. And so they basically took Redevco's proposition to heart and said, sure, if you have all these tenants who are saying that they're going to relocate their bars to, the shops at Wilton Manors, if we liberalize this, then we'll do it. And they removed parking restrictions as well. They made it, they really accommodated in many ways. And Redevco delivered. Like they brought in the span of 3 years, they brought something like 5 gay bars and then like multiple other gay-owned businesses all to the shops.
Let me ask you a question right here. Was there like a high vacancy rate for commercial spaces at that time? Were there empty stores? Was there a necessity, or was it like gay driven? Was it both?
No, it was a huge necessity for the Wilton Manors only did it because they had no money and they had no commercial tax base. So the city, it's in the thesis. I'll have to double check the numbers, but it was something like a commercial vacancy rate of about 50% at the time.
Wow. Yeah.
Which was much higher than Broward County as a whole. Broward County's vacancy rate was in, the teens, 20s. And so Wilton Manors was unusually doing badly at this time. And the vacancy rate ended up getting close to 100% by 1998. So within the span of 5 years, they ended up basically going from being primarily vacant to being primarily full, in terms of commercial space. But then I think the question, what I argued about Wilton Manors, which this is not something that I was ever 100% sure of, and what I would ask George Kissinger and others about was that, what I imagine made Wilton Manors appealing, other than the fact that there was a high vacancy rate and it was relatively inexpensive compared to other areas, and there were gays that were already moving there. But I think what made it also very appealing was the geography of Wilton Manors. There really aren't many spots in South Florida that have this kind of like arching commercial strip of land that goes right in the middle of the city. That's relatively dense by South Florida standards, that's relatively walkable by South Florida standards. And so what I would have asked is, to what extent did they envision that level of kind of density and urban experience kind of coming to Wilton Manors? Because it would have needed to be a significant amount of vision, because at the time everything was single family, everything was single story. And now, I think, and that was, the Wilton Manors in the 80s, they felt that they were, and even before, they felt they were built out. Like that was something that the city said frequently, which implied that they never envisioned, something like Wilton Station, which was built, in the early 2000s. And it was this, huge complex on the train tracks. in other, and now, and since then, there are so many condo buildings that have been built in Wilton Manors. But that walkability and that kind of the neighborhoodiness of Wilton Manors, I kind of wonder how much they were imagining that would become a thing.
Yeah, well, we'll be putting these questions to the current commissioners now, who have decided to take it to the next level, and they've raised the ceiling to 8 stories from 3 or 4. And we have 3 buildings approved. We have 4 more being proposed. At this point, it's really is it going to change the face of Wilton Manors? And that's what the Wilton Drive Voice, nonprofit is setting out to take a look at right now, and to also, create awareness. And there's a lot of different things that have happened. Like, for instance, the Halstead community in Chicago, they that even though there's been a reduction in the bars there, and the neighborhood mostly is not gay anymore, but the businesses is because the business owners own those properties, which is why they were able to withstand the gentrification. However, here in Wilton Manors, it's a different story. These are built; they're all leased basically, and some gay owners do own some of them, but the majority is not. So we're kind of looking at, what's going to happen when we get at least 15 to 20 new commercial spaces that are high end in these new buildings with condos above them and apartments. And of course, they're going to be more expensive than Wilton Manors has ever seen. So that's going to bring everything up. We've already seen leases go up, and we just lost the Pride Corner due to leasing going up, and things are already starting to shuffle a little bit. And some of the bars have long-term leases, like 12 years, 15 years left. So that's kind of good. But if you were to talk to the commissioners or the city now, or the residents of Wilton Manors, aside from telling them, if you sell your house, try to sell it to the LGBTQ plus community. Aside that, like, what advice would you give Wilton Manors right now, as so you were there for the Gaytrification and covered that. We don't want it to be de-gaytrified. So what would be your insights, your advice, or whatever, to the Wilton Manors community right now, to preserve our LGBTQ plus culture here?
Well, I think the importance of having a space for the LGBT community needs to be kind of crystallized for all parties involved, right? And so that importance is self-evident for people within the community. But for folks outside of the community, I think there needs to be a clear why. Like, why is this worth saving? And I would use the history of the economic argument of how Wilton Manors came to be as the argument for why it ought to continue to be somewhat majority LGBT, because something that comes to mind immediately as I think about the 2008 financial crisis. During that time, property values in South Florida tanked across the board. And what was interesting was that Wilton Manors actually was largely spared that huge dip in the financial crisis. And for the most part, home values remained steady during that time. And the reason was because there was a community of folks that wanted to stay and live in Wilton Manors no matter what. Like, this was not a population that was, going to be a fair weather fans, that were there for, the moment of living in South Florida. Like, these are people that are, an interconnected community that, feel the connection to this space and a belonging in the space. And so from an economic perspective, I think there's a really strong argument to be made that when you have a community that's really invested in the land, in the community, in the city where they are, that on the whole, it gives a lot more security to your town than kind of chasing the money, at any given moment, because that stuff is all, South Florida, right, is like the definition of ephemeral. Like, everything changes in South Florida for the most part. And I think it's I think Wilton Manors has had multiple boom and bust cycles, but like a way to avoid further bust cycles is to really invest in the community that has propped it up for the last 30 plus years. So that would be, so I would primarily make an economic argument about it, because I don't know that other, like, you know, the touchy feely stuff I don't think is going to sway anyone otherwise, but I think it makes good business sense for the city to invest in its community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm, looking forward to hopefully having more discussions with you about this in the future. I think we're going to run out of time pretty soon. So I wanted to thank you very much for this. And hopefully I would like to get the film cameras on you, because we're going to make this into a documentary. And because it's time. It's time that this legacy gets, put down in a really beautiful way. So that's kind of our next steps as we grow with this. And we're gonna take this conversation that we had today as beginning steps of forming what this documentary is eventually going to be. And maybe we'll see you in Utah, or maybe we'll send you some tickets to come and visit your hometown.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do either. That would be, it would be fun. And I love that you're doing this. I mean, it is exciting for me that, someone read my thesis and is going to do something useful with it.
It's well alive. I have forwarded your thesis to 3 people writing books.
Oh, nice.
And I should probably share that with you and send you their names, which I will email that to you too. As
yeah, no worries. No, that's great.
That. But yes, your thesis lives on. Thank you so much for actually having something at the Historical Society.
Yeah, I honestly was surprised that I was surprised they put it in there, because I think it was a bit of a there were little jabs here and there towards, I mean, because the Historical Society is a very, at least it was when I was writing this, like a cisgender old white basically like group of folks. Yeah, and that feels very strongly about like that 1950s type heritage of the town.
Yeah, that's what they're preserving, yes, yeah. That's
Yes,
the
yeah,
preservation. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's still the same. It hasn't changed.
Yeah. So I think there was a fair bit of storytelling, that kind of happens there, that when I was kind of going through the data, I was like, this isn't true. Like, it's not. But specifically around how run down Wilton Manors was in the 80s. Like, I think that the Historical Society really downplays that reality. They kind of like to believe that the gays just kind of bought everyone out, and it wasn't. It was, it was just they were in dire straits financially.
Wow.
But anyway,
No, that makes sense. Well, that's why they raised the building. They need the tax money right now, that the city
I'm
needs
sure.
again. So again, the next thing, the next chapter. So thanks for being with us in this next chapter, in this transition. We'll see what happens. And thank you so much. And you're in Utah, right? I think you're in Utah.
I am in Park City. Yeah,
Oh, Park City. Very good. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great to talk to you today. Thank you so much. And we'll stay in touch.
All right, cool. Thank you so much.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.